Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the most complex, absolutely fascinating, and honestly, sometimes fragile machinery inside our own heads, the human nervous system. We literally walk around every single day relying on this biological supercomputer to breathe, move, feel, and think. But how often do we actually stop to consider how it all works? Today, we're going to break down the anatomy of your internal command center. We'll map out the wiring, look at the biological armor protecting it, and figure out how billions of tiny cells coordinate, well, the whole shebang.
Section 1. Famous Brains in History.
So, to really grasp how our command center operates, we kind of have to look backward at historical medical anomalies. Basically, moments when things went terribly wrong. Because, as it turns out, early doctors really figured out how the nervous system works by studying what happens when it breaks. Take this guy, Phineas Gage. He was a railroad construction foreman back in the 1800s. There was an explosive accident and a massive iron rod shot upward, piercing straight through his cheek and right out the top of his skull. No way, right? But, astonishingly, Phineas survived. He could walk, he could talk, but his personality fundamentally changed. He went from being a polite, hard-working guy to someone erratic and totally impulsive. This dramatic event was a real game-changer for early science. It was the first solid clue that specific parts of the brain are responsible for specific functions, like our personality and emotional regulation.
This whole idea of localized function was further proven by the preserved brain of a man named Louis Victor Le Borgne. In medical history, he's famously known just as Tan. Why? Because Tan was literally the only syllable he could speak. When doctors examined his brain after he passed away, they found a very specific, localized area of damage right on the surface, and that damage correlated perfectly with his severe, highly specific impairment, the inability to produce expressive speech, even though he could completely still understand language.
So, what does this all mean? What can these broken brains teach us about our own intact nervous system? Well, they show us that the brain isn't just one big uniform blob of tissue. It's a highly specialized, localized machine, which is the perfect jumping-off point for us to transition from these historical mysteries into mapping out the actual biological structures of our own command center.
Section 2. Mapping the nervous system.
All right, let's start mapping out this incredible network. At the very highest level, your nervous system is split into two main parts. First up, we've got the central nervous system, or the CNS. This is your core, your brain, and your spinal cord. It is the ultimate decision maker. Then we have the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. This is made up of all the nerves and small groups of neurons called ganglia that branch out and innervate, well, literally every other part of your body. And crucially, tucked within this peripheral network is the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. Think of the ANS as your silent autopilot. It controls your heart rate, your digestion, your breathing, all without you ever having to consciously think about it.
Visually, the distinction is pretty clear. The CNS is anchored right in the center, the brain sitting in the skull and the spinal cord running down the back. And then you have this massive web of the PNS stretching all the way out to your fingertips and toes. Now, if you're wondering where exactly one system ends and the other begins, that transition happens right at the rootlets. Those are the tiny connection points where nerves emerge from the spinal cord or where cranial nerves arise directly out of the brain.
But if we zoom way in and put this vast network under a microscope, we see that the whole thing is built from specialized, microscopic cells called neurons. These are the absolute foundational building blocks of your nervous system. We're talking billions of them, connecting to form intricate circuits, firing off electrical and chemical signals. They transmit information from your big toe all the way up to your brain in a fraction of a second. It's wild.
Section 3. Lobes of the cerebral cortex.
Journeying straight into the central hub, we find the cerebral cortex. It's that wrinkly outermost layer that gives the brain its classic walnut-like appearance. And actually, those wrinkles, they're a clever evolutionary trick to pack way more surface area into the confined tight space of our skulls. The cortex is split down the middle into two cerebral hemispheres, and they communicate across a bridge called the corpus callosum. Each of these hemispheres is then further divided into four brilliantly distinct major lobes.
Let's break down what these lobes are actually doing. First, the frontal lobe. This is where your primary motor cortex lives, controlling your movement. It also houses Broca's area. Remember Louis Tan? Yep, that's the exact area he had damaged, taking away his ability to speak. The frontal lobe is also where your planning and intelligence reside. Next up, the parietal lobe, which handles sensation, spatial awareness, and taste. Then the temporal lobe deals with hearing and language comprehension via Wernicke's area. In the back, the occipital lobe is your primary visual center.
And finally, nestled deep within, we have the limbic areas. These act as your emotional core, managing memory, motivation, and personality. It all goes back to what Phineas Gage taught us. If you damage specific areas, you lose those specific functions.
Section 4. Armor of the brain. Now, with all those critical, life-sustaining functions packed into such incredibly soft tissue, how on earth does the body protect it? Well, directly beneath the bone of your skull lie the meninges. These are 3 layers of tough membranes that fiercely protect not just your brain, but your spinal cord, too. They act as a crucial biological barrier between the hard bone and that super delicate brain matter.
Building inward from the outside, step 1, right up against your skull, is the dura mater. That's Latin for tough mother, and it really is thick and durable. Step 2 is the middle layer, the arachnoid mater. It's named that because its structure literally looks like spider webs. And step 3, the innermost layer that clings tightly to the brain tissue itself, is the pia mater, or tender mother.
But membranes aren't the only protection. Flowing constantly around and inside the brain and spinal cord is a clear, colorless liquid called cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF for short. It circulates through the subarachnoid space, that's that webby middle layer of the meninges we just talked about, and it flows throughout the inner cavities of the brain, which we call the ventricular system.
The functions of this fluid are absolutely vital. First off, it provides buoyancy. Your brain is literally floating, which stops its own weight from crushing its lower structures. It offers physical protection, basically acting like a giant liquid shock absorber. It prevents brain ischemia by regulating pressure. It maintains homeostasis, keeping the chemical balance of your brain in check. And finally, it acts as a waste clearance system. And what's really mind-blowing here is that just about 30 milliliters of this fluid inside the cerebral ventricles is doing all of this heavy lifting to keep your brain alive and functioning optimally.
Section 5. The spinal cord. Leaving the skull and heading downward, the spinal cord physically connects the brain to the peripheral nervous system. It extends all the way from the base of the skull straight down to the sacrum in your lower back. Honestly, think of it like a massive fiber optic cable. It's constantly receiving sensory input from the periphery, like, say, the feeling of the chair you're sitting on right now, relaying it up to the brain, and then sending response signals right back down.
But here is where things get really amazing. The spinal cord isn't just a passive cable. It kind of has a mind of its own. For your typical actions, like deciding to pick up a cup of coffee, your cerebral cortex processes the thought and routes the signals down. But for spinal reflexes, like instantly yanking your hand back from a hot stove, the spinal cord provides separate neural circuits that completely bypass the brain. Your body reacts to the danger before your conscious brain is even aware of the heat. No thought required.
Which leaves us with this final, truly fascinating question. If parts of your nervous system operate completely independently of your conscious brain just to keep you safe, who is really in control? Is it the conscious you sitting up there in the frontal lobe, or the automatic hidden brilliance of your own biology? It completely changes how you think about your daily existence, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep marveling at that incredible machinery that makes you, you. Catch you next time.